What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to my vlog for the month of October, where I briefly talk about what I worked on in the previous month of September. I want to walk through what I got painted, what I got done, and then what the plans are for the coming months, and especially as we come up to the end of the year. Just take a quick sort of overview on what I want to get done versus what I think I can realistically done. More on that later, but it's sort of hitting a bit of crunch time now as I have certain high level goals I want to get done, and I don't know if I'll be able to achieve all of them without making some compromises and cutting some projects that would have been nice to work on, but I don't think I can realistically fit in. But again, more on that later on in the video when I talk about future projects for the last 3 months of this year. Well, I guess 4 months if you include October. But basically, briefly, high level, September was a bit of a busy month for me. Not so much hobby-wise, but just other commitments. We had our Horus Heresy Weekender with our friends, and that was probably about 4 or 5 days gone of just no hobbying. Had a lot of fun, played a lot of great games with my Space Wolves, and we're already brainstorming for our next Horus Heresy Weekender, which is probably going to be next summer. So 6 or 7 months from now. I'll have quite a bit to work on to expand and sort of rewrite my army list for that. I also had to work on a commission project, which unfortunately is under NDA, so I can't show or talk about it here. It wasn't a large project, but it was fairly complex just in terms of both the number of models as well as assemblies required and just balancing all the different elements. So between other social events, we had like 4 birthdays this past month. All the events for that, the Weekender plus the commission project, that really only left me with probably about 15 days, 16 days to work on my own personal projects. So not a whole lot done in terms of number of models, but I did choose to work on some fun things as a bit of a palette cleanser, especially coming off of working on the Thunderwolves, which were complex, as well as that commission project was, again, a lot of complexity in the project itself and the way that it was being managed for the different components. And so I tackled my vehicles for my Space Wolves, both the Vindicators and the Line Raider. I did my Lieutenant, 5 Blade Claws, and then Professor Xavier from Marvel Crisis Protocol. So let's zoom in. I'll show you some close-ups of each one and just talk through sort of what I enjoyed working on for these models. So for the Vindicators, I ended up picking up both of the kits that Games Workshop makes. One is the modern 40K chassis, which uses the current Rhino chassis, and then I also picked up the Horus Heresy Demos variant. So it uses the Demos Rhino chassis, and I ended up 3D printing a seed shield to mount on the front of this tank, just so that it has the same cut and profile as the 40K version. I think it looks really imposing with the sea shield, sort of that iconic Vindicator look. And it's also a great opportunity to add a really vibrant splash of color to these tanks. I wanted to have sort of this yellow and black theme running throughout most of my army because they are themed for the black mains. And so because I don't have these big insets, or I didn't want to paint any of these insets yellow, the seed shield was a great opportunity for me to have that color injected in there. And I also chose to paint the hazard markings differently on both tanks, just to have a little bit more variety there. So the army feels a little bit more sort of visually distinct in all these different elements. I also ended up using the 30K vehicle accessory sprue for all my vehicles. So especially with the 100 killers and the pencil mounted combi bolters, and then you'll see on the Line Raider the same 2 weapons. I'm a huge fan of the more rugged, practical look of these designs. I think the 40K versions that are pencil mounted and meant to be handheld, so they're on that pivot arm with handlebars for the Marines to actually grip onto, pop out of the hatch. I'm not a huge fan of the way those look. It increases the vertical profile of the vehicle, and it's not a fan of the way they look. So I ended up using the 30K variants for all my tanks. And then the reason that I chose both the modern and the historic version, the design of the vehicles, is it allows me to create this sort of narrative connection between my 40K Space Wolves and my 30K Space Wolves. So this 40K army of mine is sort of a little journey through time, and it's carrying through these vehicles and this equipment from a bygone era and ties into the history and the longevity of the Legion and saying, hey, yes, this army has been around for 10,000 plus years. One thing I did do is on my 30K Rhino or Vindicator, I used the 30K decal sheets. So it's got the red transfers for the wolf heads. Whereas on the 40K vehicle, I used the 40K transfer sheets for the new wolves. So it's got the black wolf head, and then some of them have the yellow diamond pattern behind. This line reader was a huge labor of love for me. Probably my favorite tank, just design-wise, although the kit is certainly showing its age. I believe this box is effectively the same sprues as from when I first got into the hobby, which would have been 26, 27 years ago. Did make a few modifications to it. You can see that it's got the Mark IIB Proteus side sponsons. Now, this was a kit that was originally made by Forge World. They had both the unique design, so it was a full Forge World resin kit for the Mark IIB, but they also had a conversion kit, so you could buy all the different elements to convert the plastic Line Raider into the Mark IIB variants. Now, that kit I think has been out of production for years now, so I did end up 3D printing both the side sponsons, and I also printed up a multi-melta for the top before realizing that the 30K vehicle accessory sprue had a multi-melta that was sort of the same design as the common bolter here. So it would have been a lower profile. I mean, I think this still looks good. The only thing I don't like about this printed file are these little flamer tanks in the back. It's a multi-melta. I don't know why it has flamer canisters, but I'm not familiar enough with 3D or 3D modeling to remove those, so I just painted them. I did paint the interior for this tank as well. I'll throw up some photos of the screen as well of the interior shots I took before I put the tank together. So I spent a lot of time painting up all the community monitors. I painted up the engine mount in the back, the doors, seats, things, everything, which unfortunately you can't really see once the tank is assembled, largely because I didn't want to wire up the tank with LEDs. And that would have been a bridge too far for me. And then just a lot of gap filling to cover up any of the seams, just because the tank is older kit. It's not quite as well put together or well made as some of the newer models. But there's quite a lot of work to make this sort of clean, presentable look. It doesn't have any visible mold lines or seams. And then because this tank sort of sits in between the 30K and 40K age, I ended up using a combination of decals from both the 30K transfer sheet as well as the 40K ones. It's got some of the red transfer sheets, the wolf head, the total markings, Legion number. But I've also used some modern scripts and saga markings from the newer 40K transfer sheet. For the infantry, I painted my lieutenant with Combi Bolter. I made a couple of minor modifications. I cut off the skull and crossbones on the chest plate. I gave him I believe this is a 3D printed head. And then I cut off some talismans from the new Space Wolf army box. I think one of the bolters are bolt pistols. And just stuck it to the bottom of this bolter here, just to give him a bit more of a wolf look and tie him in my army. And then in terms of the decals as well, just to give him a bit more of an aged look, instead of using the 40K decal sheet, I use the Horus Heresy one for his attack marking here and his army marking here. I gravitated between making him a wolf guard or a wolf scout, just for what color to paint his right shoulder pad. I ended up leaning more towards a wolf scout, just because narratively he's a lone operative, lone wolf. It fits in more with the scouts than the wolf guard, so I chose to do it with the gray field and black marking that the scouts are known for. And much like with the wolf guard, all of my wolf scouts, so this guy, along with my incursors slash eliminators or whatever they're called, are going to have unique markings, just because they don't belong to any one particular pack, but they're all sort of chosen and picked from all the different parts of my army to form those wolf scout units, those packs. I also painted up 5 blood claws. Now these are from the new army pack, and the squad is a combination of plastic heads from the new kit sprues, as well as some 3D printed ones. So I think this is a plastic head. And these two have, at least in this batch of 5, these two are the 3D printed ones. So again, for me, narratively, the Space Wolves, because they rely a lot on their senses, their sense of smell, their sense of sight, their sense of sound. I believe, or I think, that the wolves would typically fight without helmets, or at least that's their preference for it, unless they're fighting in environments where helmets are required. And so all of my models in my Space army are going to have bare heads and no helmets. Also, a great opportunity for me to really practice painting heads. Something that it's not that I struggle with, but I could definitely use a lot more practice on in terms of doing the highlighting and shading, painting them in a more realistic fashion, as well as experimenting with different color palettes and ways of mixing up skin tones instead of just doing a sequential base highlight shade sort of approach to skin I normally do in the past, which works when you're assembly lining, but it ends up looking way too uniform. I had a lot of fun painting the pack markings for this because it's non-uniform. It's not symmetrical, and it was an interesting challenge to repeat the same pad over and over again while maintaining the same position and proportions. They're not 100% identical, but I think those minor variations adds a little bit of character to the squad, and it makes it feel just a little bit more unique between each individual model. This is also the first time that I've taken care to add pouches, grenades, and all these little knickknacks to my infantry models. I've never done it in the past, largely because I've never liked doing it. I've always found it a waste of time. But this army, honestly, is a bit of a labor of love for me, and so adding those little details adds a lot of character to the army. And I've chosen them carefully to match what's happening with the model. So, for example, this Bloodclaw has his dagger drawn, and so the dagger sheath is just the sheath on his belt, and the pistol holster actually has the pistol in there. Whereas a model like this, with a pistol drawn, has an empty holster. Now, not every model will have a dagger and a sheath, but I think at least my blood claws, all of them will have pistol holsters, so that what they're if they're empty, it means they're holding the pistol, and if they're not, the pistol's in the holster. So that was a cool little build slash assembly choice of mine. And then for Marvel, I painted up Professor Xavier. So this was the tutorial video for this past month. This was a great model to work on. I'm a huge fan of simple sculpts, and I think when Atomic Mass puts out models like this, they always knock it out of the park. It's not covered in frilly details. There's no stitching, no micro seams to have to worry about. Simple, crisp folds in the cloth. And then the mechanical elements on the chair aren't super busy. There's some great flat shapes to work blendings off of, and then some really nice sharp angles to create these contrast jumps between highlights, midtones, and shadows. This is a great model to work on, and it didn't take too long either. I think this is probably about a day and a half, 2 days of painting. And I did end up going with the card art as opposed to box art. Like card art, I believe, also is in line with the cartoons. Whereas I think the actual studio model that was painted by Tommy Mass has a white suit, which is fine, it's okay. But I like the more cartoony, colorful look of this. And it fits in line with the rest of the X-Men that I have as well. And to have those colors with tiny, the blues with tiny the suit. The greens ties in more with, for me, what I have right now is the Phoenix. But at some point, whenever I pick up Rogue, I'll probably paint her green and yellow as well. So, in terms of what I'll be working on for October, I'm likely bleeding a little bit into November, depending on timing, is trying to work through a lot of my Space Wolf infantry. So we've been playing in a couple of 40K leagues, both semi-casual as well as a fairly more competitive one. And I found that my initial list is not good at all. It's got a lot of MSU stuff, which I thought would have been fun to play with, but in practice makes the army sort of pillow-fisted and not really effective at killing, not really durable, unable to skirmish, and struggles to do both primary and secondary objectives because I die too quickly. So there is a bit of a change to my list. I did end up dropping one of my battle leaders, and I dropped the incursors. And what I ended up taking instead was 6 more Thunderwolves. That'll be 3 squads of 3, and that gives me a lot of skirmishing power. Sorry, I also dropped the suppressors. So yeah, 3 squads of 3 Thunderwolves gives me the ability to sort of project forward threat really early on. They're great at skirmishing. They're very durable for the points. They can toe tag for primaries and action monkey for secondaries, and just generally be a nuisance and gem in the lines. So I think this, given how long painting these 3 took, I think it was probably 6 or 7 days. I'm expecting the same for these 6 as well. So this I'm aiming to work on in November. And so what I want to try and do for October is work through the rest of my infantry. So for sure, I've already got the other 5 blood claws lined up. I've done the airbrushing base coats already on there. I want to paint up Ragnar, the Wolfguard Terminators, the Wolfen. I've got 2 squads of 3 head takers. And then before I work on the last 2 characters, so I've got a battle leader and Logan, I do want to pivot to some of my Marvel models. Atomic Mass was kind enough to send me the new Exodus box. And so for the month of October, I want to paint up Exodus, we've got here in sub-assemblies, Avalanche, and Lady Mastermind. And these will be the models for the tutorials for October. And then I also want to get a leg up and paint up Namor, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. They will be the tutorial for November. So there's a bit more of a focus on skin for those 3, which I think will be an interesting sort of trio to paint for that month. And these will be a continuation of my mutants. So they're going to be based the same as my X-Men, and then they will be a great way to pivot into my Brotherhood, which I believe I've already done tutorials for already on my Patreons. I'll be following those all in because I love the classic box art / cartoon look of the Brotherhood. If I have time for October, so if I can get all of these guys done, plus the X-Men, I will do an alternating approach. So I'll paint up probably the battle leader. I'll paint up 3 Thunderwolves. I'll paint up Logan, and I'll paint up 3, or more likely 3 Thunderwolves, battle leader, Thunderwolves, and I'll finish off with Logan. I think he'll be a great sort of ending weight to finish up the army, a great character to just spend my time on and close out this project. That should bring me to mid-November. And because I still intend on finishing off my Seraphon, just very briefly talking about it, I will probably devote December and the rest of November finishing those off, along with some Marvel models for the tutorial videos for the month of December. What that means is I had an intention to paint a couple of Shatterpoint display pieces for Sword and Brush. More than likely, that's not going to happen. I'll be honest, I don't even know if I'm going to Sword and Brush, so I apologize for that. I will get them done eventually. It's just these two projects are taking a little bit longer, Space Wolves, and then as a result, the Seraphon, and it's pushing everything back a little bit. So they're my priority just because I do want to start 2026 with those two projects off of my plate. In terms of content, yeah, so again, I've got Exodus, Lady Mastermind, and Avalanche for October. I've got Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Namor. I keep calling him Budget Aquaman in my head for November. And then December, I'm not quite sure yet. I've got a bunch of models queued up. Depending on when I get my hands on them, I will most likely paint up the new Web Warriors. And then I'll also do some touch-ups on my old Spider-Man models, largely because they are 4 years old. So I might do a little bit of a short video on that and my approach to revisiting and touching up older models, which I don't do very often, but can sometimes be worth it, depending on the age of the models and how they look. So cool. I think that'll wrap this up. A little bit rambling near the end, but hopefully you stuck with me. And if you did, you're a champion. Once again, thank you for all of your support. And yeah, catch you in the next one.